Wizards of the Coast has been printing Commander-specific legendary creatures since 2011, cards designed specifically to be put in the command zone. As you might expect, these have not been without controversy. Powerful designs like Yuriko and Edgar Markov stretch the mechanics of the Commander format to its outer limit, and all sorts of other cards are controversial in their own right, even if they're less obvious mechanical outliers. This month I want to talk about the design and gameplay philosophy behind several iconic but controversial commanders, specifically whether they accomplished the goal of being fun and dynamic game pieces, or whether they're mistakes that should be avoided at all costs in the future. I'll get to some more controversial options in later videos, but for now we'll be keeping things simple. I want to talk about glass cannon commanders that are powerful and explosive, but also fragile. More specifically, I want to talk about how these cards, while certainly having some benefits, can risk misleading players and causing them to stumble into play experiences they don't necessarily want. Something else that's fragile, though, is your Magic the Gathering decks, which is why you should consider some extremely cool-looking accessories from this video's sponsor, Voidmonster. Voidmonster is run by Magic the Gathering artist Forrest Emel, and features some pretty fantastic original designs. The color playmats are a great evergreen option, and there's also a new drop every month available for only a limited time. This month is the Devoid drop, which includes a playmat, a deck box, and a bonus mana tracker card if you buy the bundle. I love the sort of chalky, austere exterior paired with the writhing blue tentacles on the interior. This perfectly encapsulates Eldrazi to me. If this drop interests you, you can follow the link in my description and pre-order before October 19th. Thanks to Voidmonster for sponsoring the video. Okay, so glass cannon commanders. There are plenty of recent commanders that fit this description, and I'll get to one of the most infamous examples of this in a little while. But for now, we need to dig into the origins of this sort of design by discussing the first ever commander set. Commander 2011 was a set that was quite experimental and out there for the time, and there are lots of things here I can talk about. The poor by present day standards construction of the precons, the reprinting of the ultimately banned trade secrets, some intriguing early attempts at political tools seen in the Jeskai deck, and other assorted oddities. This set also contains a lot of interesting early attempts at Commander First designs, legendary creatures designed specifically with the intent of being commanders, and which try to fit that mechanical role as a centerpiece creature. Of the commanders in this set, two have really stood the test of time, Kaalia of the Vast and Animar, Soul of the Elements. Sitting at number 5 and number 29 most popular among all commanders at present day, respectively, these have endured as potent designs in a way that other commander options from this set, like Gave and Riku, simply could not. And this makes sense. Far from being crowded out by any old graveyard or tokens or spell copy commander, these two are unique and embody their playstyles in a way that's difficult to replicate. Take Kaalia. She's a 4-mana 2/2 flyer in Mardu colors who lets her controller put into play an angel, demon, or dragon tapped and attacking whenever she attacks. The merging of these three big flying creature types associated with 3 different colors is quite iconic and specific to Kaalia, and though her creature cheating functionality shares some similarities with more recent designs like Akul the Unrepentant and Mr. Foxglove, no other card accomplishes this cheating quite the way Kaalia does. The same goes for Animar. Though there are other cards that can provide deep discounts for creature spells, such as Rakdos and Hamza, these generally require a bit more specificity in their play patterns to pay off big. Animar, on the other hand, is a fully pre-assembled creature storm engine. The only step to making creatures cheaper is casting creatures, and it's not hard to see how this could lead to some dramatic turns without much setup required. In short, both of these commanders have a specific and iconic niche that they embody well. This is one part of their popularity, and the other is simply that they're efficient at their role. Each of these cards has a high ceiling, and achieving a powerful game state doesn't require as many steps as a lot of other commanders, simply requiring having cards in hand ready to deploy, and avoiding opposing removal. But what about the floor? The biggest weakness of these two commanders is that their game plans are a bit brittle, and not particularly hard to set back to basically square one. To fully get into why I'd apply a label like Glass Cannon to these, we should really discuss the nature of what commanders provide for various decks. Fundamentally, all commanders will be an enabler, a payoff, or something in between. Payoffs are the most common. Ishin doubles on attack triggers, amplifying the volume of gameplay produced with these, and Atraxa gives proliferates, which amplify the power of cards that use counters. These feel nice to play because the play pattern is simple and effective. You start putting together a game plan with cards the commander synergizes with, and then you drop the commander after a bit to turbocharge that game plan. Enabler commanders are less common. Zur the Enchanter is the only card in the top 100 commanders I'd call a pure enabler, as he isn't really a payoff for anything at all, aside from maybe having a pair of Lightning Greaves and some cool enchantments to grab in library. You play him so you can start tutoring out enchantments, and then your game plan gets built up from there. This end of things is closer to where Animar and Kaalia live, with Animar being a slight enabler and Kaalia being a moderate enabler. On a basic level, being an enabler isn't a bad thing. My favorite decks feature commanders that fall closer to the enabling end of the spectrum. However, enabler commanders are inherently trickier to make play well because of the nature of the enabler-payoff relationship. Whereas a payoff commander is the amplifying adornment atop a solid 99, an enabler commander will a lot of times be step 1 to doing anything in the game, with the rest of the deck living atop it. To be clear, this isn't always a problem. If there are other ways to get the enabling component, it can be fine. If the enabling component is hard to prevent or set back, it can be fine. And if the enabling component isn't essential to the deck's functionality, it can be fine. The issue should hopefully be becoming clearer. These caveats go frequently unfulfilled with each of these commanders. Kaalia of the Vast's role is to cheat permanence into play, and she's generally an important enabler for the big flying creatures game plans she's played with. Can the deck do its game plan without her? Not really. The average Kaalia deck has 36 lands and 11 pieces of ramp in it, numbers far too small for a deck with an average mana value over 4. Next you might ask, can it at least protect her? And the answer is kind of. Hasty Boots are golden here, and you can certainly add other cards that can protect Kaalia early, such as Mother of Runes or Deflecting Swat. However, this is complicated by the fact that the deck is also vulnerable to board wipes, since it's a low-velocity, big creature mid-range deck, so ideally your Protection Suite can help that out as well. This might allude to the fundamental challenge with building Kaalia, deck space. Ideally, the deck will want some single target protection to deal with early pinpoint removal, as well as some board protection and a healthy draw suite to let it manage wipes, plus a healthy count of lands and ramp to help the deck bounce back from all challenges. Going higher on the counts of all of these things could let the deck feel more flexible and resilient, but also risks removing some of the bite of the deck. As the count of angels, demons, and dragons dips lower to offer other things to the deck, the aggressive options to choose from for Kaalia triggers will also typically dip, and you'll run out of creatures to cheat out earlier and more often. It's no surprise then that a lot of Kaalia players take the opposite approach: lower land counts, lower protection counts, focusing on powerful beaters rather than card draw, even including amplifier permanents like Isheen and Windcrag Siege that can further pump up the explosiveness of the deck. Why play some neutered, halfway consistent Kaalia deck when you can live out your most daring Mardu fantasies to stray ever closer to the sun with your cool flyers? On the surface, Animar might seem quite a bit different from this. It's typically more reliant on early draws to start presenting a threat at the table, but its relationship with opposing interaction is arguably less problematic. At worst, you'll empty your hand into a board wipe and lose a bunch of resources, but unlike with Kaalia, the 99 typically features a decent amount of draw and ramp, allowing for smoother recoveries. At best, Animar can turn a deck into a high-velocity machine. Even without an Ancestral Statue Infinite combo, with the right draw engines, ramp engines, and maybe a haste enabler, you can empty a hefty portion of your hand onto the board in a single turn, possibly deleting an opponent in the process if you can swing, or get some Terror of the Peaks triggers. The commander also has a bit of built-in protection as well, unlike Kaalia, dodging about half of all popular pinpoint removal, so there certainly are differences between these. Where these commanders are similar, though, is in their power profile, and in the difference between the floor and the ceiling of their game plan. Due to the fact that both of these commanders are enablers that discount large amounts of mana on creatures, in the most ideal games with the best draws and the least opposing interaction, they're exploding out of control. Meanwhile, if draws are worse, particularly for Animar, or if there's more interaction, particularly for Kaalia, the function of discounting creature spells isn't as helpful. Quite a lot of commanders feature the phrase "draw a card" or some equivalent in their text box, and while you could argue that generic value is a little overplayed as a payoff for a commander to grant, this design choice has had the undeniable boon of improving the resilience of a lot of playstyles. The commander of a deck is a card that's available at all times, and assuming the draw condition isn't too hard, having that permanent 8th card in hand be a draw spell reduces the risk of stallouts and improves recovery. If you need to hit land drops, drawing cards can find you lands. If you're looking for specific synergy pieces, drawing cards can get you closer to those as well. If you just got board wiped, as long as you drew some cards before that happened, you'll hopefully have some options for rebuilding. A value engine commander typically won't be the most threatening or aggressive choice, but it will usually be a safer and more consistent one, all things equal. Your command zone secures you exactly one element of your deck, and though you can try to sculpt your 99 to lead to a well-balanced experience, there will still only be one card in your deck that you're absolutely guaranteed to see. This is why the most explosive decks out there typically feature an explosive commander, focused on either damage or raw board size. And a pretty infamous example of this that I'd also apply the Glass Cannon label to is Jodah the Unifier. Jodah is a 5-color commander that gives your legendaries +X/+X, where X is the number of legendary creatures you control, and who also gives your legendary spells you cast from hand Legendary Cascade. Unlike the commanders from 2011 I discussed earlier, this card is closer to the payoff end of the enabler payoff spectrum. However, it ends up fitting a similar profile to those other two due to how absurdly efficient it is at one specific task, getting power and toughness onto board. The 2 lines of text on the card can combine to create utterly monstrous boards of legendary creatures in 1 or 2 turns, and passing the turn to a player who has Jodah on the field feels like rolling the dice on whether or not you take lethal combat damage this turn. For this reason, Jodah tends to eat removal like few others, being more or less a kill-on-sight commander at most tables, alongside other powerhouses like Winota and Tergrid. This might be fine if you're prepared for it, and you could even do what my brother did and engineer your Jodah deck to have maximal access to protective cards, in place of a bit of explosiveness. But an unknowing player who throws together a Jodah deck and expects to be able to assemble an army of 9 12/12s in peace might have a rude awakening when they pull up to a table and have their commander reacted to appropriately. This points to the biggest critique I'd lodge at the glass cannoniest of commanders, the ones with the highest ratio of explosive power to resilience. They act like a sort of bait, attracting players who are understandably seeking out big exciting plays, and then putting these players in situations where their opponents have few choices but to bully their deck's terrifying commander off the field repeatedly. All of this might feel like a hit piece on these sorts of glass cannon commanders, and maybe even all commanders that lean more explosive and or more fragile. However, I don't want this video to be misread as saying that these decks shouldn't be played or have no redeeming qualities. There is an allure to playing a deck that gets going fast, that does something opponents find scary, and that forces the table to wake up, even if it doesn't recover well. Part of the appeal is that it puts a strong emphasis on the early and mid-game, almost serving as a test for how long a player can extend this period, and how much explosive power they can pack into it. My most powerful deck doesn't really have a late game plan, and though this can mean being less relevant in a game that goes that far, it also means that mid-game turns are far more exciting and rich in decision making for me, which can be a lot of fun. As another example that's even more emblematic of this philosophy, I played several games with a Brina deck at MagicCon Atlanta recently. In my games against a mixture of high bracket 3 and low bracket 4 decks, I typically get off to a strong and attention-grabbing start, with several creatures loaded up with +1/+1 counters and swinging in big at opponents. But each game I'd inevitably get my board whittled down and see my game plan start to stall out. I lost every game I played with this deck, but in every game it also felt like I had a shot at winning, and each game also had an interesting narrative arc that I played a major role in. I was the villain, the biggest, baddest deck around on turn 5, and I was usually able to smack away half the collective health of my opponents before my eventual decline. I didn't win those games, but I sure played a lot of Magic the Gathering during them. Really, the takeaway here is not to not play Glass Cannon decks or Glass Cannon commanders, but rather to know when you're playing these sorts of commanders, and to make an active decision about whether that's what you want to be doing. I would argue that Kaalia makes for a kinda bad precon commander for the same reason I wouldn't hand a Jodah deck to a newer player, because I don't think a Glass Cannon commander is going to produce consistently good play experience for somebody just getting into the game. It can provide a tantalizing taste of explosive gameplay with big, cool-looking creatures, but it's just as likely to produce frustration when the Kaalia player eats a bunch of interaction and stalls out for a while. This is not to say that a zanier or spicier commander is never the correct choice for a newer player, and I'm sure there are plenty of players who had a blast getting into EDH with a Kaalia deck, but I personally would shoot closer to the middle of the explosive resilient spectrum, and let players find their own way to the spiciest commanders. This is also why I'm of the opinion that Pentlaza getting printed was the best thing to happen to dinosaur decks in the past 5 years. This is the quintessential Timmy tribe, and for years the primary commander for Naya Dinos was Gishath, an explosive but fragile 8-mana enabler commander. On the one hand, I'm sure this is a very exciting card to have in the command zone for a lot of players, but in practice I've seen it mostly serve to make the big creature decks at Helms feel even swingier, and fall even flatter in the face of interaction. Seeing a Gishath player sitting there waiting for a 10th or 12th or 14th land drop is a pretty common occurrence, and one I have to imagine isn't a lot of fun for somebody newer to the commander format. Meanwhile, swapping Gishath out for Pentlaza, a 5-mana engine card that often finds value or ramp off of its triggers, makes most decks feel much smoother, and also less punishing of suboptimal choices made in the deck building process. Playing Gishath still remains a spicy option for any dino enjoyers looking to play with fire a bit, as it should be, but it's good that it's no longer the default choice for all dinosaur players. One final thing it's worth talking about is how to know when a commander falls into that sort of glass cannon classification. There isn't an exact description, but these are a few attributes to keep an eye out for, in descending order of glass cannoniness. 1. Decks with the commander struggle to hold on to gained resources through setbacks. Most decks that are having an explosive sequence of turns will gain mana, draw cards, set up permanents of various types, and use other zones to solidify their advantage into the longer game if they can't figure out how to win on the spot. If you're way ahead and either half of a Cleansing Nova causes you to lose basically all of that advantage, you're playing a Glass Cannon deck, and your commander might be a Glass Cannon commander. 2. The commander plays an essential role in the deck and has few to no replacements within the deck. If your commander fills an important task and you don't have great ways of accomplishing that task with any other cards, you're putting a lot of pressure on them to stay alive, and much of your deck's power is concentrated onto a singular point of failure. 3. The difference between the deck's floor and ceiling is dramatic. Instead of floor and ceiling, you could think about the deck's 80th percentile game versus the deck's 20th percentile game. If the above average game sees the deck exploding out of control and the below average game sees the deck floundering, you're looking at an inconsistent deck if nothing else. If these describe a commander or deck you're interested in, it doesn't mean you shouldn't play it. You should, however, think about whether these attributes will create a good play experience for you, and if you do choose to build the deck, these are some things to keep in the back of your mind as things to mitigate if you find stallouts unfun. Commander choice, as with most things in EDH, is a decision best made with intentionality. Know what you're getting into, and you'll have more fun in the games to come. Thanks for watching, and thanks to Architect for supporting the channel. Architect's nice UI and flexible category system make me happy to spend way too much time brewing random nonsense there. A link to my decks is in the description. I also want to thank my supporters on Patreon and YouTube, some of whom are on screen now. Both my patrons and my YouTube members get bonus videos whenever I feel like making them, usually about one a month, and I'm also taking submissions for my fall supporter deck review. If any of that sounds interesting to you, a link to my Patreon is in the description.